And so, as Petra was just explaining to us, it's very important that we understand the science and how to use it in the stories and arguments that we construct. And one of those who spent a lot of time understanding that is Michael Mann. And Michael Mann started off as a natural scientist and was one of the lead authors working with the IPCC when it first was being developed and producing its reports. And it's only after the attacks on his work and on himself that he started to look deeper into the issue of disinformation and better understand the attacks that are being used to discredit the work that all of us, including you, are part of. And the arguments, it's interesting to see how they have dramatically changed. So moving away from complete denial that climate change is an issue to now focusing more on whether climate change is human induced and to the extent that it's going to impact us. So the conversation has also changed. And this change in conversation is happening because organizations like the IPC and even in your work, these arguments and these positions that we take are improving to better understand and better communicate, to be able to deal with the deflection and the division that is happening in our economies, in our politics to address these issues. And within your work as a leader, it's going to be helpful to understand and identify the arguments that are used against your work, where many will try to say and blame that corporations are not at fault and that it's the individual that has to make action happen, right? Where the individual has to recycle. Or they'll make arguments that climate change is so threatening that it's impossible to do anything about it. So just accept the fact that we're not going to be able to save the planet from the impacts of climate change. Or maybe even proposing things that are not real solutions or solutions that are not feasible within the time frame that we need to act on them, right? Like we talked before about carbon capture. Yes, it's going to be an important part of the work we do, yet the technology is not where we are, and we can take actions now that are going to be able to address these issues. So how do we incorporate this and move forward? Well, you can start by discovering the new tools and systems that are out there that are going to help you identify false data points, looking deeper, as we were just talking before, about where is the research being funded? What is the biases that are being shared and communicated from these different detractors? Using the advice that's available to go deeper into the data that's available, and then improve on the quality of what our work is so that we're able to address and impact these different detractors in their arguments.
Yeah, I think it is a fascinating book. Also, I would recommend to you that you read the book. I really was one of the few. I read really from the first to the absolute last page, every single page, because it's really, really interesting. And what I really like, he has also quite a bit of humor in it. And for example, he kind of, one of my favorite quotes was that, oh, actually changing everyone to adopt policies regarding changing to renewable energies, but too risky. We won't make it across the world. But changing to geoengineering and to just try out something which no one has tried out before, to block the sun reaching the earth. Perfect, really good solution. So I think this was one of my favorite quotes, really, because I think it brings it really to the point that yeah, it is very, very risky, for example, to rely on geoengineering, and that this will save us in the last minute. If it's, I mean, we haven't never tried it out, what is happening when we block actually all the sun coming to our Earth, and what all the side effects might be of such a fantastic solution. So it might be really much easier to say, let's issue policies to use more renewables.
So deeply related to what Petra and I have just been sharing about understanding the sources of information and how to combat disinformation, credibility is a very important principle that will need to be addressed. And the paper that we link here really goes deeply into how credibility is built and what specific sources of information are most reliable when it comes to communication. And the results from their survey and analysis are very fascinating to understand, where people believe that there is much more credibility for scientific institutions than what is supplied by the government. And the government is more credible than that is provided by businesses. So there's an innate understanding in the population of levels of credibility between scientific or institutions, which are seen to be much more independent, versus the government, which might have some political bias, versus businesses, which would have a bias around profit. And we keep talking about the IPCC so much because of it being perceived as being the most credible, or one of the most credible organizations out there. And Greenpeace is another one of those, on par with universities, research and development organizations, and other scientific organizations. In all of these cases, you're going to have to learn and to share climate change facts. So do think about how you can build trustworthiness, build cooperation and accountability into the credible information that you're sharing. And along with that, right, is an understanding that leaders in science and leaders in politics are communicating and sharing with you what they are researching and what they believe is our path forward. These two very helpful videos are available for you to learn and go deeper. And we put in some key questions to ask yourself of when thinking about the scientists. So who is afraid of the big bad climate, right? What is the worst that global warming can do? And what is the role of scientists as leaders in communicating global warming? And on the political side, what is it the role of these politicians in the work that they do? What is their contribution to enhancing and constraining our efforts to address climate change? And whether you agree one way or the other with Al Gore or Peter Ward, I think it's helpful to understand how these individuals have a role to play in the science.
I think as a leader, you have often not enough time anymore, especially if you want to start moving things. You want to really focus on what the changes you want to make and how you want to transform your organization and so on. But I think take a moment to really understand who are these leaders you would trust. Also, who are the leaders in science? Who are the leaders in politics? Where you have to think, yes, you have done your research, you think they are really trustworthy. Because I think then going forward, you could say every time Al Gore, for example, is saying something, I believe he will have done good work to actually come across with this. Or David Attenborough, for example, is for me someone, and I think for a lot of people, where people have the feeling when he says something, they don't start to test everything, to check everything he has said. He has just a lot of trust from people. Do establish which one are your figures, your leaders, where you just going forward say, okay, just listen to it and I believe it. Yeah, in case you have the feeling after all the lessons we have given you already that you would really like to understand more the science of greenhouse gas emissions, we have shared lots of resources with you, but it's often you might want to do a little bit more. And this video is a really good one to do. What we have tried in this video, as we have designed it ourselves at Nottingham Business School, is to actually do it without all the other influencing things. Because we had from people who did our climate literacy training, they said actually was something, we used something from the National Geographic there. And they were saying, oh, it's all these dramatic pictures, it's all this kind of drought here and flooding there, and I really don't like it, and I think it's manipulating me. I really want to just see the science. And this is what we have tried to do here, that it is really just the science. So do check it out.
And so going along with Petra's point, it might be helpful for you to go deeper into the science behind climate change and the impacts of greenhouse gases. And so the Future Learn course from Climate Literacy and Action that Petra developed should be a useful information for you to check out as another resource. And in Ray Andre's book, she provides these two very powerful questions for you. And in this module, we present these information to you in a way, if you're not able to get the book, but think about what factors are getting between you and the truth and what you can do about that. and then approach other people who have different ideas to understand the connections that are there.
Yeah, and you will recognize the slide. We ask you at the beginning to spontaneously write down your experts, the communities, the websites, the newspapers you trust. You might have now, after we have gone through all these slides, talk to you about establishing the science, establishing who you can trust, and so on, thinking about the bias you might have. You might think, maybe I should reflect on these people and really make sure I have the right experts and so on. So you might want to make a new list here, or you might modify the list you made, or you might say, actually, I have done it all the time. It was nothing new for me, which is also fine, obviously. And then the second step is when you have your list, as who you are going to trust and where you are going to do the mental shortcuts to get your information. That then to highlight for yourself who are your key stakeholders and you want to communicate to, and do they have the same experts, the same communities, the same newspapers? Because you might actually think my stakeholders read a different newspaper than I do. Let's actually find arguments from their newspaper which will convince them, and you might want to adjust this depending on who you are talking to.